Welcome back, guys, for part two of our waiting seasons. I'm Angie,
And I'm Jessica.
and we're just so excited because I guess we didn't get enough the first time of just sharing some of our testimonies and our stories of our waiting seasons. In the first part, we talked about waiting through a health crisis and waiting through relationships. And I think this time we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into other areas of our lives where we needed to wait on God to answer some of our prayers, but that He actually showed up. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, we shared what a waiting season can look like when we're still in the midst of that waiting season, but we've seen God's hand in other waiting seasons where He's already given us our answered prayers and is still working and changing the circumstances that we were waiting for and praying so deliberately for. So I told Jessica, I'm like, we have two things that we can share that I think is going to be powerful. And we all have family members or, husbands or wives that are waiting to to be saved, that you were praying for their salvation. And we know that God is so intentional in what He does and the timing that He does it for, but He also is testing our faith and our endurance and our prayer life. And we also know the powerful things that happen when He opens and shuts doors. So those are the two things that we're gonna try to dive in today and talk about. I told Jessica this is gonna be a lot of things that have actually happened in our lives. So it's exciting when we get to share testimonies and what we did in that waiting season.
Yeah, I think it's really nice to see because we're all waiting for something. Whether
Mhm.
we are waiting for salvation in our family members, whether we're waiting for healing, waiting for relationships, waiting for job opportunities, or whatever the case is, we're always in a waiting season.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the times we want to get to the next season. I know I am very guilty of that. Instead of enjoying the season that I'm in at times, I'm always like waiting for the next and waiting for the next. And I have to always bring myself back and ground myself and say, hey, like, enjoy the moment, enjoy the today. But I'll bring it back to you so you can start
Yeah.
diving
And
into.
especially because, like you were saying, especially because we've seen it, right? We
Yeah,
we get to share these testimonies that we then get to reflect on and say, okay, well, we were in a waiting season back then. God delivered. He showed up probably more than we expected.
yeah.
For me, it was praying so much for my husband's salvation and for him to know Jesus. Um, we when we met, we were, I guess you can say, unequally yoked. Um, but we both really didn't have um, Christ in our lives. I was raised Catholic, and that's kind of all I knew. And I don't know that he was anything. He would just say, there's a God out there, and that's all I know. But, his mom was Christian, and I do believe she prayed a lot over him. So this was an answered prayer for her as well. But what I did in the midst of our marriage, when we were going through some really tough trials, was was pray. I knew that I needed to have and bring God into our marriage. The only way that we even salvaged our marriage was through Christ. I remember, that was one of the things that brought me to the feet of Jesus, was just praying so much for my marriage and ultimately for my husband's salvation. When I gave my life to the Lord, I knew that I needed to be an example that he can also follow.
Yeah,
So during that waiting season of, God, is he going to give his life to the Lord? Is this marriage going to be now equally yoked like you intended to be? And there was a lot of like questions in my mind. And there was times that I even questioned, like, well, if he doesn't ever give his life to the Lord, well, what do I do? What does my marriage look like then?
mm-hmm.
And God would always just kind of reel me back in and say, all I need you to do is have faith and believe that this promise that I've given you of restoring your marriage was going to come to a fruition. And we always talk about that nothing that God does for for, in our trials is always for our good.
Yeah.
And that's what happened when I got my second diagnosis, even with my first diagnosis, but my second diagnosis, I think, really struck us to a core. And I remember going to him and saying, babe, I have faith and I'm strong and I'm going to get through this through Jesus. And he wasn't as strong, he wasn't as strong as he is now.
That's
And
a tough
little,
one.
yeah, and little by little, what he did was just kind of just hold on to a little bit of faith and strength that I had. And one day, I mean, after prayer, after him testing God, because I know that that's what he did. And one of the times that even we were praying over my healing, he came to me and he said, babe, one of the things that is going to bring me to Jesus is that if I want to see you again, I know that I have to give my life to God. And in that moment, that was every answered prayer that I needed. That was all the, those restless
Like
nights
it
that
all
I would.
felt worth it.
Oh yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, every sacrifice that I've done, it came to full circle for me.
Yeah.
And during that waiting season, what I was doing was not only praying, but you know, I needed to change my heart and my response so that he can see Jesus through me. Because at the end of the day, the only time that non-believers get to see God is through our actions, through our words, through our love. And that's what I was giving him. I was giving him godly love, the love that he had never seen in the past. My responses to some of the arguments that we were having were more gentle, were more, with love and with less pride. And that waiting period where he got to see all of that is what, at the end of the day, he needed to see a change in me in order for him to believe, okay, this is real. This is something that can happen. But it came full circle for us. Now I've seen him give his life to the Lord. I've seen baby steps into his prayer life. I've seen his faith, just restored. And during that waiting season, that's what I had. I had my church community pray for me. I had my friends pray for him and, his family. And now that they've seen an answered prayer, those are one of the things that we hold on to when, we're in other waiting seasons, is those promises that have been fulfilled.
Yeah, it's like he did it then and he can do
He
it
can do it
again.
again. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really nice to see it. Like I've witnessed it and I've been through the walk with you guys, and I've definitely seen the change in you. And like I mentioned earlier, it's that people, we are the Bible that some people are never going to read. So the way that we live our lives, the way that we walk, the way that we respond to things, we have to be aligned to the way, like, it's like that bracelet, like what would Jesus do, you know?
Yeah. Constantly,
And
always having to remember that.
yeah, we're
Yeah.
never going to be perfect. It's not about perfection, it's about progression and getting better day by day. And I have seen the shift in how you handle situations. And it all came from, I guess, having a spirit of pride that we all have,
Yeah.
because we never want to be wrong when we are in an argument, as to stuff like that. So I guess what overtime does is, obviously God just starts renewing your heart, renewing your mind, and then it goes to your favorite Bible verse,
Yes.
Romans 12:2.
I always tell her, I said, you know what, Jessica? I said, now I understand. That verse came to me really through an Instagram reel. And it was through a fasting period, and we'll get into one of those podcast episodes of why fasting is so important. It was through a fast, somebody just, not somebody, God, the Holy Spirit, through somebody, put that Bible verse and, in my way. And, it talks about renewing our minds, and letting go of the things of this world so that God can do his perfect will for our lives. And what I think is so beautiful there is that that verse helped me in my waiting season. It helped me in my marriage because I knew, okay, I need to renew my mind. I need to change my worldly ways on how I would normally respond to these things in my marriage in order for him to see God through me, because that's the only opportunity he was going to see it.
Yeah.
And that's what would happen, little by little, as I dived more into the word, as I grew my relationship with God. It was almost like Jesus was telling me, I'm going to mold you into somebody that he's going to look up to, that he's going to see my heart. He's not going to see pride. He's not going to see anger. He's going to see gentleness. He's going to see love. He's going to see, a different mother, a different wife. And that was in the midst of me going through some other tests and trials. So imagine, my husband seeing me go through a very vulnerable, time in my life, holding on to that faith, and then me not showing any resentfulness towards what was happening in my life. That the only thing most of the time he saw was gentleness and no pride, and that renewing of my mind and of my heart and of my spirit. And he did see through a lot of that, and he would tell me, like, I need that strength that you have. I need some of that faith
Yeah.
that you had. And I was like, well, there's only one way. And when he finally gave his life to the Lord, I would always share with Jessica, like, I saw it. I saw how it was going to happen, where God was just going to open up his arms and accept him and love him just like he's done with all of us. And when they always normally at the end of church service, they always give the salvation call. I'll tell you this, I've never had to see him raise his hand. I know in my spirit he has. I know that he's, given his life to the Lord. I've seen him go up for prayer. I've seen things that I never thought
Yeah.
were going to happen.
Yeah.
And I thought those were far fetched. I thought, man, this waiting period is going to be long and I'm
Yeah.
never going to see the fruit of this. But he's shown me that he's been able to keep his promises. And I can't doubt things like that. After you see those things come to fruition, then it's just like, how do you doubt? How do
Yeah.
you doubt the power of God and what he can do? But it doesn't happen, overnight. It just takes a lot of prayer, a lot of faith, and God is testing us in that time. And a lot of times I was like, okay, God, I know you're testing me, but like, you need to really get this man to follow you and love you, because like he said, if I'm going to see him again after, we all, pass and go to heaven, then he needs to give his life to the Lord. And that's what's happened. And I hold on to that promise, and I hold on to that testimony, and I say, if it happened to me, it can happen to
Yeah.
anyone.
And I think time, talking about giving things a time period, I think is so important too, because we sometimes hear, and going back to your husband, if we're talking about time period, this isn't a time period of, like, I would say, like 2 or 3 years, right? Since
Yeah.
we started
Yeah,
walking with
for
God
sure.
together
Hmm.
till around now. It's actually been like 5 years, but I feel like your husband, like the past year, so it took about 4 years.
For sure.
So I always like to talk about that, and I think it's so important to give
Yeah.
things a time frame, because somebody that could be listening, and I speak from experience because I would do this.
Yeah.
Somebody that could be listening could be like, "Oh my God, like it happened for her and for her husband." But it took four
It took
years.
4 years. I mean, put it this way. We've been married for 10 years. We've been together for about 16, 17 years. It's taken about 10 years because, when we're first together, first couple of years, we were both unequally yoked. We were both just living horrible lives. But it literally took 10 years from the time that maybe I even started praying for that. Put it this way, better perspective. His mom has probably prayed. This is
Oh
a
yeah,
Christian woman.
I'm praying for
If you want to
almost
talk
30
about
years.
timeline, right? This
Yeah,
woman has probably prayed. He's, in his 30s, probably since the day he was born, because I know
yeah,
that she
that's
was
so
a Christian
true.
then. So if we really want to give a timeline,
Yeah,
I mean, I prayed for my husband, but this is a mother praying for her son. For any mothers out there, like, keep praying. Pray, if he's not married, pray that a godly woman enters his
yes.
life.
I was gonna say that, if pray for the wife,
Yeah.
or girl dads or girl moms, like,
Relationships,
yeah, pray for that, the
relationships.
person that your a daughter or your son is gonna meet, because those are gonna be the people that are gonna continue the legacy of your family.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you brought up timeline, because yeah, it's easy for us to talk about like my timeline or what that looked like, but if I can speak for my mother-in-law, man, that I know for a fact that that woman prayed for that the moment that he was born. And now for her to see that, she gets emotional every time we talk about it, and rightfully so. but that's just the real timeline right there. So moms, do not stop praying. Get a community around yourself to pray with you, to give you that strength, to uplift you the times that you feel like my son is never going to happen, or this is never going to happen for my daughter. It happens. It happens. And God puts the people that He wants around Him. He knew our plan, and He knew what that was going to look like from the beginning. And what's beautiful is that aside from my husband seeing healing and, restoration of our marriage and all that, he has seen how our lives have changed through opportunity. He has seen doors open, doors close, you know, financial opportunities that have happened for us, job opportunities, growth opportunities. God has taken care of all those, in all those areas. And when Jessica wanted to share that, I said, well, yeah, that's perfect, because it's two things kind of that come to hand. He's also seen it when we've prayed for, waiting for you to get a job, or waiting for something exciting to happen, in your life that you've been praying for.
Mm-hmm.
When it all comes, to fruition, and when it all actually happens, he sees the celebration that goes on, but
Yeah.
he's also seen the nights that we were praying in our living room. The
Crying.
crying, he probably didn't see it, but I'm sure he heard it. The times that we were worshiping in our living room, and
Mm-hmm.
just sitting there, just waiting for God to give answers to our prayers. And that's happened, and He's
Mm-hmm.
seen that through you. So aside from the other miracles He's seen in our lives, He's seen a lot of miracles happen through Jessica, and I love that because He gets to see those.
Yeah. And when you mentioned about like the opportunities and like the blessings and stuff like that have come from like the shift of like being in community with God and
Yep.
surrendering your life to God. I saw a reel the other day which I like took it and I ran with it and I try to remember it at times. And it was a reel that talked about blessing and favor. I don't know if you saw me post it recently.
Did you send it
I've
to me
reshared
maybe?
it like 4 times in different occasions, but every time I think about it, I put it. And when we talk about like having favor from God and like God blessing us is we don't put it into like a form of like monetizing, like blessing us financially, even though He does do that stuff. But
Yeah.
like the Bible says that blessed are the peacemakers. So it's like once your character starts changing, you become a peacemaker,
Yeah.
in situations that you become blessed. That's how you're blessed. And there's other ways where it talks about blessing, but then when it talks about favor and having favor, sometimes we put favor with like, oh, like, God chose us. But if you really look at it, especially from like a mother perspective, is like when you think about favor and having favor from God, and I'm gonna dive into that when I talk about like God opening and closing doors for me and opening a job of opportunity. Like I felt like when I went into this job interview that I'm gonna talk about, like I had so much favor from God.
Yeah.
But it's like favor also comes because God trusts me. So when you look at it as like
Yes.
favor is not like, oh, you're God's favorite, because God doesn't have favorite. God loves all of us.
So good.
But
Yeah.
then God gives us, there's some of us that He favors and He gives certain tasks. And if you look at it from a mother perspective or a father perspective, and you have 2 or 3 kids, and one of them's like, oh, like your mom's favorite because mom's always telling you to do this and that. But it's not because it's your favorite, it's because mom knows that if she gives you that task,
Yeah.
you're going to do it. So she trusts you with that.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like God, you guys seeing all the things that God
So
is
good.
doing in your life through like blessings and favor, it's because God trusts you guys, because you guys are now under His will, under like surrendered to
So
Him.
good. Yeah.
And it's like, but favor is not comfortable. Sometimes favor is being uncomfortable.
Yeah. He's testing us.
But yeah, but you're being tested, and just know that whenever God chooses you and you have favor, that you are being molded and that He trusts you. And it's like, okay, God, like favor me, even if it's gonna be something that's not gonna be easy. And I know that this walk hasn't been easy, but it's been so beautiful because we've seen like the growth of your husband in this, and then we rejoice in the little moments. And have another friend who's also praying, and we've been praying for her husband and salvation of her husband. And it's like every day she sends me voice notes, and it's like, oh my God, She just like tells me all this stuff that God is doing, and I'm just like,
Yes,
yes.
yes.
And it's like I love these voice notes and I love these like praise reports when my friends tell me like, oh, God did this, or I saw that, or like when you would tell me like, girl, the other day Kevin was like, oh, I couldn't, like he had to work on Sunday,
Yeah.
and then it's like, oh, He's like, babe, I'm sorry that I had to work on Sunday. I can't make it to church. I want to go to church.
He's like, I actually missed church. And I'm like,
Yes.
what? He's like, I don't know. No, he goes, I don't think I've ever said that. He's like, but I actually missed church. And I'm like, not gonna lie, I sent it to my pastor. I was like, this is what you've been praying for. I just want you to know that, our prayers are being answered. And it that's the thing, right? Is that we get to share that testimony because we don't know what other women, other men, other people are praying for.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can see God respond in that way, we feel like we do need to share these things. That's how this podcast even became about, is
Yeah.
that every little thing that would happen in our lives where we would see God in our day to day, we would take time to just give him that praise report and
Yeah.
just call each other and say, look at what's going on. And we did that with your job. And it's such a beautiful testimony that I know you want to share. And I feel like people need to hear, because there's so many people in that waiting season for a job opportunity, right? You just sit waiting for that door to open, for that opportunity to open, come knocking at your door. And a lot of times too, and I know a lot of our friends that, they're servant leaders, they're serving at their church, they're embodied in Christ, and God hasn't necessarily open up that door or answer that prayer, but they're like remaining faithful, and God is doing something in that waiting season for you. Like, I know that he was doing something during that waiting season to prepare you for the blessing that he had for you. So that was beautiful to see. We would like, why isn't it happening right now? Like, why isn't God answering? Like, we're doing everything that he's asking us. We're checking off those boxes that he's
Yeah.
asking
I
for
think
us.
that's the hard part too. Like
Yeah.
when you think that you're doing all these things for God to move, and it's like, but then you have to like check your heart, because it's like, are you doing it because you want God to move, or are you
So
doing it
good.
because you truly feel like doing those things? And I know for me, I sometimes like get discouraged because I am a person that I like to see things come
Well,
to
all of us
pass.
do.
Well,
We
yeah,
all
I
love
guess
that.
we all do. But when I think about like the things that God is like doing in my life, or the things that I want Him to do, and it's like I go through it and I'm like hype, and I'm like, all right, God's gonna do it. He's gonna do it. He goes from glory to glory. He's gonna do it. And then like 3-4 months pass, and I'm like hyped those 4 months, and then one day I plunge into like, why isn't God moving? Like, am I not doing enough?
Yeah.
Am I not praying enough? Am I not diving into my Bible enough? Am I not serving enough? Or like I start questioning the way that I'm living my life, and then I'm like, but that's not God's heart. God doesn't want me to sit here. Like, He honors what I do. He knows my
Yeah.
heart. And I remind myself, I'm like, there's a reason why whatever I'm waiting for hasn't happened yet,
Yeah.
you know?
For sure.
But when I was seeing God in my waiting season, when it came to like opening and closing a door for me, it was I take it back to like last year, which was my year of caregiver. It was a year
Yeah.
where my mom had foot surgery in February, and then in October she had her uterus removed because she had cancer in her uterus. So it was a lot of stuff, but I couldn't work a full time job. So I was just like in a season of like trusting God with my finances. I was in a season where He really humbled me, where He made me realize that I don't need all this stuff to get back or to get by, that I made me realize that I don't lack anything. And it really humbled me. And I use that waiting season to like really like trust Him. A lot of beautiful things happened last year.
Yeah.
I got to be really intentional with my mom and spending time with her, to the point that I got to spend so much time with her that she started going back to church, you know? And that
Yeah.
was like
So it's like another little answered prayer
yeah.
in the midst of waiting for an answered prayer. Like,
Yeah. And that was really nice to see, because my mom's always been a believer and she has stopped going. So I was glad that she started going again. And it's beautiful because the other day, last week, or was it last week, we went on a trip. And I was like, hey, like, let's go on this trip for this weekend, you and I. And she's like, well, I can't miss church.
Oh,
Like,
wow, okay.
I was like,
I'll
okay.
take
I'm
it.
like, okay, but we're going on vacation because I want to travel the world with her. I want to take her to as many places as I can. It's just her and I. So last year, like I said, since it was her and I had to take care of her, and I couldn't hold a full time job. So even though I have an online store that was helping me, I had gotten a part time job, and I was just trusting God, and He helped me get through those months. But then once it was time for me to start looking for a job, I was like deep into prayer, and yeah, I was just trusting and trusting,
Yeah. That's
and
all
I
we could
ended
have
up
done.
I was applying and I was applying and nobody was calling me, and obviously then you go into those moments of like doubt. But then again, like I felt like during that season I didn't really have, like, I think towards the end I had like a little bit of like, okay, I need a job because I turned 35 that year, and in my mind, like my 35th birthday, even though I always celebrate it and I have like girls' dinner and I'm very intentional with my girlfriends. We had an amazing time. This
Yeah.
past birthday
It
was
was actually
so
really
much
fun.
fun.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a day, not that day, but like it was a day where I actually like cried because I was like, oh my God, like I'm 35 and I'm not where I want to be
Wanna
in life
be.
or should be or where the world tells you that you should be. And it's because I didn't have a full time job, and like I didn't have a husband or anything. Like I was like, ah.
Typical
But
season. Yeah.
yeah. But once again, like I snap out of it really quick, and I was like, okay, like even though I might not feel like God is working, I know that He is. His Word tells me, and I have to go
Absolutely.
back to those promises that even though I don't see it, you're working, and He truly did. He really made that year be so intentional, where I actually sat down and I put in my journal, because when I was having that moment of doubt of like, oh, my life is this, and I was like drowning in my misery for like 5 minutes, I was like, let me write down all the beautiful things that happened this year.
He's done.
And I
Yeah.
did, and I literally have the list, and then I'm not gonna go into details, but it was like 8 different things that had happened.
Yeah.
And this is while I was still praying to get a job, even the car that I had, and that was another thing. I was 35, I had no job, my car broke down, which was pretty much a new car, so I was like, what is happening? It was like attack after attack. I felt like.
Well, I think God was also testing you for sure in that period because if you had a choice in that time, you had a choice. Am I going to compare myself to what the where the world tells me I should be, or am I going to trust
Yeah.
and remain where God has me and where He wants me and fulfilling the promises and the purpose of why He has me in this season. And I think you did what you needed to do during that season, but it's not easy for
Like a
sure.
constant reminder. I had to remind myself because you remind yourself and you're on fire, and then like a week later, you have to remind yourself again. Sometimes even like daily, you have to
Daily,
remind
yeah.
yourself. That's why sometimes I write things on the mirror in my room and like my closet mirror, and I
Well, your
write
answered
certain
prayer
things
list is
there.
my favorite because, like you said, you get to see
Mm-hmm.
those answered prayers that have already occurred. And, well, if he did it once, he's going to do it again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's. I definitely hold on to that too. If he did it then, he could do it again. If he did it for somebody else, he can do it for me because he's faithful and he loves all of us. And yeah, in this waiting season of like waiting for a job, um, I ended up going to my old church to meet up with a friend of mine that I used to serve with there. And when I got there, I saw an old friend who was part of the welcome team, and I was like, "Hey, how are you? Long time no see." We started chatting, and I was like, "She's like, oh, like what have you been up to?" She told me she got married, so we were talking about that. And then I mentioned to her, I'm like, "Oh, I'm doing well. I'm just looking for a job."
Yeah.
Because after that was around like I think the end of like November, and I was like, I'm looking for a job because my mom had already came out of like her season and she was back to being Miss Independent. So I was like, okay, now I can go back to my life. Now I can go back into a full time job because I've always had that stability in my life. I've always, had my car, my job, like all
Yeah.
that stuff. So to not have that, it really made me put a lot of stuff into perspective. But I ended up, chatting with her, and I was like, "Oh, I am, currently looking for a job and all this stuff." She goes, "Oh, somebody from my small group like works for a recruiting agency, so I'll put you in contact with her." And I was like, "Okay, cool." So she already had my number, and then when I spoke to her, she told me something that I'm never gonna forget, and she said, "Closed mouths don't get fed. She told me, she's
So
like,
good.
Jessica, always tell people
So
what you
good.
need.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're here for as the body of Christ. Like, we all have our gifts and we all have like our careers and stuff like that. And maybe somebody can help me out in that, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So, anyways, I got in contact with this recruiter and she's like, hey, I'm going to go out of town for the holidays, but I'll be back in New Year's. So I
God's
was like, okay.
timing.
So I enjoyed the holidays. My family came into town and all that stuff. And my church family was praying. We kept praying. I'm like, guys, another Sunday came. Oh, guys, I still need prayer for a job. I'm like, all right, Jess, we're going to be praying. And then January came by and, I reached out to the recruiter and I was like, hey, like, I hope you had a good holiday. So I just want to reach out about a job. And she goes, okay. So I had talked to her and I was like, look, this is how much I want to get paid. This is my resume. Um, this is what I've done in the past or whatever. So like a week later or like a few days later, she sent me one job. She's like, hey, I
But we
emailed
prayed
you
for
a
that one
job.
job.
Yeah, yeah.
We prayed.
But in the midst of things, I was like, just one? I'm like, I like options. So she sent me the one job and I was like, hey, like, I got it. Like, do you have anything else? She goes, no, like, that's all I have with what you want to get paid. And I was like, okay. Because it was like a 45-minute drive from my house. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, well, we'll go for it. And they helped me prepare for the interview. And I went into the interview like without being scared. Like, there was nothing. I had so much peace because in my mind, I'm like, God, if you want this for me, you're going to open the door. And if you don't, you're not going to open it. And I'm okay with that because that means that if this door closes, it's because you have something better for me.
You trusted that.
Yeah,
So
I really, really did. Like I look back and I was like, man, like, that's usually not me because I usually when I go to like an interview or like a date or something like that, I'm always like nervous and like jittery.
Yeah,
Like,
the expectation for sure.
yeah,
But when you
like you don't
trust
want to
God's
fail,
plan,
right?
regardless, I guess that's the piece that we
Yeah,
were like,
I was surreal because I had the peace when I went into the job interview, but then the first day I was nervous. I'm like, why am I nervous? I already got the job. But I just spoiled it for you because yes, I got the job. But I went into the interview and I just went in there like knowing like who I am and knowing that God has my back.
Yeah.
And I went in there and I'm just gonna be myself. They're either gonna love me or they're not, and that's okay, whichever route it goes. So I went and I had like the best interview and I got along with everyone. I was like one out of three to interview. I was the first one that day, and then he had two other people. And then the following day, I got the call that said that, hey, like they want to move forward with the job offer. And I was just so happy. I was praising God. I just felt like this weight lifted off my body because I'm like, oh my God, like I'm going to be able to get my car again. I'm going to be able to.
And everything happened
provide.
pretty quickly too.
Yes.
Like we were able to see not only you get the job, but then everything else worked perfectly and aligned perfectly.
Yeah.
I remember I was like, Jessica, really? All of this just happened like
Wild.
in a couple of days. It was like one thing after the other. But I love that you said like what you were talking about favor. God trusted you with something that he knew you were a good steward. He knew that you had been obedient to pray through it, through and that you were also going to be content no matter what the outcome was, right?
Yeah.
Like I think he knows our hearts. He knows, okay, well, whatever I make this look like, she's going to be content no matter what. And I think that's what God honors is that you were really content. You told me, you were like, Angie, no matter what happens, I'm going to have all the peace in the world because if it's for me, I'm going to be happy. We're going to rejoice. But if it's not, it's because God's got something better. And that attitude, if I'm honest, it was probably one of the first times that I really felt that it was like real, that it was real, that you were trusting God's, will for your life, which is not an easy thing to do. You trusted, he over delivered, right? We talked about how he over delivers when he answers those prayers. And we think we're just waiting. What else do we do? Well, God's in the midst of working something beautifully and ready to over deliver to us all the time.
And I think what really helped me go into it with so much peace and trusting him was because that year had prepared me and made me realize that you lack nothing. God's always going to provide and He's going to give you what you need
Need. Yeah.
to get by. So even though it was a season where I wasn't making the money that I wanted to make or anything like that, I had enough. So even if I didn't get that job,
He was
first of
still
all,
gonna
I
make it
knew
happen.
that God had something better. And I also knew that I'm going to be okay because I've been okay the past year that I've been just working part time.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that also like set the tone for that. But another thing that I wanted to touch on was God is the God of suddenly. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts, something shifts, and it's like that came out of nowhere, and
Yes.
then He accelerates it,
Amen. Yeah.
and then it goes, and that attaches to God's timing and waiting season, and it's like we tell ourselves that we want things to be a certain way and all that stuff, and then He uses a whole year to help me
To prepare
be more
you.
intentional with my mom,
Yeah.
to prepare me, to help me launch my business, to have me pour into people because that was a year of pouring into people. And He helped me get through it. So then now the year starts and it's like, bang, here's a job, here's a good salary, here's a car. And
Yeah, it was like almost
it
so
was,
much. Well,
yes.
again,
Good,
we
good
talked,
much.
yeah, we talked about how my husband witnessed all of this, right? So it was like he didn't only witness my prayers and our family prayers, he witnessed my best friend's prayers. He's witnessed his mom's prayers. He's witnessed, other blessings that have happened in your life that I hope, I know one of the podcasts we're going to talk about, financial blessings. He witnessed all of that. And it's crazy because we think that people are not watching and seeing what's going on, but they are, and our testimonies are important. That's why these things are important, because we we have a choice to only talk amongst ourselves and pray amongst ourselves, or we have an opportunity to share those testimonies with the world, to share it, not to brag, or not to, well, brag about
Yeah,
maybe God, but
about
not to
God's
brag about our
glory. Yeah,
lives, but to see what He does, and I think your humble heart, your obedient heart, that God saw all of that. So we need to position ourselves in that waiting period to be humble, to be able to receive, um, to have those quiet moments with God, and to cry it out. Because, like you said at the beginning, like there was times where I would break down and I'd be like, God, where are you showing up? Where is this happening? Like I'm doing everything. I'm checking off all these boxes that I think I need to be doing in order for you to respond. And like you said, suddenly He did it
suddenly.
all.
Yeah.
Suddenly He did it all. So that's so good. I love that. I think that we can focus in on that suddenly, and those moments of just surprise that God does to us. And even when it's things that we think it's there are there to test us, He's working them into our favor. He's working everything for our good. I know that my diagnosis was turned around and it gave my husband his salvation. And I did tell him this, and I know that God knew my heart, and I still to this day say this. If my diagnosis saves my husband, then I'm okay with it. And I really I really feel like God knew that that was very sincere from my heart, because I knew He's done everything. He's given me everything. He gave me life. He can take it away. He's given me everything I own. But I knew that my husband needed that salvation because of our life. We needed to see each other again
Yeah.
in another world. And I told him, if my diagnosis takes me out, but you give your life to the Lord, then it was worth everything. And I think God honored that. God said, well, I'm going to give him his salvation. I'm going to allow you to see that. I'm going to allow you to live a beautiful life with with him and your family, and I'm going to allow you to share this testimony for those women or men or families that need to hear these things through their waiting seasons, that it can take years, but it can happen.
Yeah. And it's so nice. And we're just seeing God, like even in this job, like I'm seeing God move every day. Like there is no doubt that I am not there. Like I am there on purpose for a
100%.
purpose. The conversations
100%.
that I have, He's placed me in a place where people are believers. So I get to have God conversations at
Yeah.
work. And it's like I get to pray for people and I get to be intentional. And man, like I am just so blessed to be there. Like
Yeah.
so blessed.
And she calls me with all these beautiful
Yeah,
stories, and I'm like,
so
this is
many
why we need a
things.
podcast, to share these beautiful things that are happening. And when we see that growth, we're like, all the glory to just to God, because man, there's How
Yeah.
else can all this thing happen?
Yeah, and also like, I wish, I mean, I would love to stay at this job forever, and like, yeah, I would love to stay at this job forever. But when we talk about being obedient, like if God ever wants to remove me because He needs to position me in somewhere else, like I need to be flexible with what God wants
That's
for
so
me,
good.
you know.
That's so good. Yeah.
And for me, in my case, I landed in a place that I'm like, man, like this place is beautiful, and I'm so glad to be here. And it's been like nice things when it comes to like God and this job. But then I also know, like, I have a friend who, man, she was battling in that job. She was battling like her coworker, and it's like, we share testimonies now. It's like, man, like God has really have me minister to my coworker, and my coworker has been changing to the point that now we're like friends. And I'm like, so that's another situation of God opening an opportunity, and God opened that opportunity for her, but it wasn't nice for her
It wasn't
because she
easy.
was
Yeah.
getting a lot of spiritual warfare at her job.
Yeah.
But God used her to minister to her boss, and now they're having a relationship. And it's like, that's what we're here for. We're just here to be the vessels. We're here for the Great Commission, which is to share the gospel with people. And once again, we do that with gentleness, and I always like talk about that because it's so important.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to be told what to do because so many people live with pride. I know that I've lived with pride, and I'm always like praying for deliverance of that. I feel like I carry myself really well when it comes to that, and I don't let that get in the way. I'm more of like a quiet person. I'm not a conflict person,
Yeah. Yeah.
but pride can still show up. So we're always like praying for that. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's part of our spiritual growth, when we're getting rid of that pride and we get to be a different version of ourselves to people. That's where they see God,
yeah,
when it's hard not to show pride. So this was
yeah.
so cool. I think it
Yes,
was
I'm so
amazing to share
excited.
these, waiting season testimonies of answered prayers. How long they took. I love that you talked about a timeline. That was so good.
Yeah, I
And
think that that's so important.
yeah, give perspective to our listeners. So this was awesome.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us, and
Yes, thank
we'll see
you.
you guys on the next
All
podcast.
righty,
Bye.
bye.